When the prophet prophesizes, as we discussed, it's communication directly with God. We speak about God's attributes. What are God's attributes? Indiscriminate kindness, mercy, deliberate precision, justice, many things. God is a healer. God is a provider. These are things God does. And it all goes under the umbrella of chesed. As we say in the Amidah, the second bracha, mechalka chayim bechesed. God sustains life with indiscriminate kindness. The world exists, and the world is comprised of many kinds of people. Devout, evil, he provides life to everyone. To have an understanding, an appreciation of that, now it's very interesting. If you're able to break down something, you're able to trace it to its source. Let's say the world, it's 5,000 years into existence, and we'd have prophecy today, and God will reveal and communicate to the prophet at a certain level his attribute of indiscriminate kindness, his mercy, or other certain fundamentals of existence. When he understands it, he doesn't understand it in the physical sense only. He understands in the spiritual sense the root and the energy which brings that about. As a result of that, he's able to trace it back to its source. As a result of that, the prophet knows the past, although he never studied history. I'll give you an example. Person is in poor health, and this doctor is a physiologist. He's an expert, and when he sees this person's physical condition, he says, it's clear you've been abusing health for the past 40 years. You have emphysema because you've been smoking 3 packs of cigarettes for the past 40 years. You're overweight because this cholesterol is not, it's only because of what you've eaten. That you have high blood pressures, based on today's evaluation, I understand what you've been doing for 40 years. So the diagnosis now, or the understanding now, gives me understanding how you've lived your past life. And because of your condition now, unless you correct it, the doctor says you have 3 months to live, unless you do something drastic. How does he know? Are you a prophet? No, based on his understanding, evaluation of his health, understanding the physiology and the condition of the person, I understand where you're coming from and I understand where you're going. That's a semblance of what the prophet understands. God, when he gives the prophet an understanding and his attributes, through that he understands, he's able to understand the past. Because the reason why things are today as they are is because they were predicated on many things earlier, and you're able to trace it back. And because of this, God doesn't have to reveal the future to the prophet. He understands by evaluating today's state of being, of existence, where's the world going? Where the world's going, whether it's going off the cliff, it will self-destruct, or that it's going to soar. Things will get better. Based on his understanding of the past, present, he understands the future. But it's only because he has an understanding in the root of that energy, which brought everything to the point it's at, therefore he knows the future. So it's not God revealed to him the future. God gives him an understanding of his attributes, of the way he relates to existence, and through that he understands the past, present, and future. This is how the Ramchal understands. But the times, he tells him the future. Certain event will take place. A nation will be given a chance either to do tshuva, to repent, or be destroyed. Like that's the story of Nineveh. Yonah, the prophet, was sent to read them the riot act. Either you repent or Nineveh will not exist anymore. God will destroy it. As much as a prophet understands, Rambam writes in the Laws and Fundamentals of Torah that there are no two prophets who are the same. Based on the spiritual dimension of that person, that will determine what God will reveal and communicate to that prophet. The greater the spiritual capacity, the greater is the communication. The more profound is the understanding. The prophet who's the lesser prophet, although he may make the grade of prophet, but because he's a lesser prophet, what God communicates to him is to a lesser degree of understanding. Therefore, within that capacity, he understands that point, but not beyond that point. But no prophet, including Moshe Rabbeinu, understood the essence of God, because the essence of God was never revealed to anyone. It's only in regard to how God relates to creation. Creation is finite. Within finite, Moshe Rabbeinu had the maximum understanding of creation. But the creator who created creation, God never shared that with any creation, including Moshe Rabbeinu. So no one understood creation to a greater degree than Moshe Rabbeinu. Why? Because God revealed to him the maximum that a human being is able to amass within being a created being. Now it's interesting. The Navi writes that the heavenly throne, there are four sides for the heavenly throne, four images. And the prophet sees it. What do you see? One side is a nesher, an eagle, an ox, different sides. And he says something interesting, the Ramchal. We read at the beginning of creation, when God created all the various species, he passed them before Adam, that he should name the species. And after he named the species, he realized that among all these species, he has no mate. He named the elephant in Hebrew Peel, the lion Aryeh, the eagle Nesher. Each bird was given a name, and after naming all these various species, he realized he had there was among all this vast creation, there was no one who was compatible to him. That's what God created. The woman who was created from part of himself, and created the woman. How did he understand that these species had no relevance to him? So Rav Chaim Volozhiner writes in the Nefesh HaChaim, when he named the eagle Nesher, Adam was the handiwork of God. Before Adam ate the tree of knowledge, he was able to see from one end of the world to the other. He had an understanding of all the inner workings of creation, all the energies which brought about every species. Adam understood what that energy was. Why the eagle manifests itself in the physical form as an eagle. Its wing spread, its power, its speed, its ability to soar. That's the king of the birds, the eagle, the lion. So when he's named that three-letter word Nesher, what's included in that word Nesher? Nesher is the word for eagle in Hebrew. But what's included in that word is included an understanding of every aspect of that bird, that species, its spiritual makeup, and why it's made up the way it's made up, and its value in creation among all species. Except we know all our understanding is so superficial, it's a label. For us, it's a label. But why did Adam give that label? If you'd understand what lies within that name, you'd understand every aspect of that bird, not only in the physical sense, but why its physicality is as it is, why its plumage is as it is, why its shape is as it is, and what the spiritual energy that's behind it, which brought it about to be what it is, and what its place in creation, why that bird had to be created to make creation complete. because Adam had that level of understanding. So the Ramchal writes, Rabbi Luzzatto writes, when the Navi is shown things, the eagle, that's only the image. But when he understands the eagle, he's not shown the eagle as an eagle. He's shown the eagle in terms of what its representation is. In the spiritual realm, what that eagle represents. Everything understands is from the root of the being of the species of anything in existence. It's not only the eagle. It could be vegetation, a tree, a human being, whatever it may be. There's a work, Rabbeinu Nissim was one of the early commentaries, and there's a work from Rabbeinu Nissim, he was a commentary on the Talmud. It's called Droshes Ran. Ran is an acronym for Rabbeinu Nissim. It means his lectures. He gave lectures, homiletic lectures, and he writes over there that at one time, if a person wanted to find his mate, who he should marry, a mate, a wife, is called a soulmate. It's a pairing of souls. You'd go to the prophet, and the prophet, because of his dimension of understanding, he would look at the person, he'd be able to see the makeup of his soul, and he would know exactly which woman would complement the soul. That's how it would work. And because he was a confirmed prophet, and he had the credibility of having that level of understanding, it was a done deal. The woman understood that this is her soulmate, and the man understood that's his soulmate. Because he has an understanding, not of the physicality, because they have a commonality, because this is his kind of look, and this is her kind of look. And they both like Beethoven, and they like to ski, and it's nothing to do with that. And it's to the essence, the core of the person, actually one complements the other. That's because the prophet had that insight. Due to being a prophet, he had the ability to see the source of the human being, why he manifests himself to be this, because he has this kind of soul. Because the physicality of the person is to accommodate all the challenges of the soul. That's why a person is endowed with wisdom, a degree of wisdom, strength, wealth, all the various inborn attributes and characteristics that a person has. This is to accommodate and facilitate the development of the soul. The prophet saw this, understood this. Therefore, he understood the woman's soul, looking at her makeup, that these two have to be paired together. And only then does the soul have a chance to achieve its level of completion, of perfection. That's the Droshes Haran. So that's the prophet. Now, very often, we see things that seem to be totally contradictory. Contradictory. Give you an example. God says to Avram, you will have a child at the age of 100. This child is the future of existence, the future patriarch of the Jewish people. And the age of 37, God says to Avram, bring him up as a burnt offering. Avram had a little bit of a problem. God does not renege on his word. If God says Yitzchak is the future of existence, and he will facilitate and address the objective of existence, if I'm going to bring him up as a burnt offering, there's no future. And God doesn't renege. How do you reconcile both of those statements? Humanly, it's impossible to reconcile them. Not possible. What was the test of Avram? The test of Avram was not, does he slaughter his son, does he not slaughter his son? That wasn't the test. The test of Avram was, God, it doesn't make any sense. How do I reconcile your two statements? Because the way God presented him, they're not reconcilable. The test was, to what degree was Avram negated to God that he didn't ask the question? That was the test. The test was not, does he slaughter his son, does he not slaughter his son? Avram already went into the kiln, not to bow to the idol. Avram understands God's the creator. He lives only for that creator. So if God says slaughter your son, of course you slaughter your son. But Avram has a problem. How do I reconcile both of the statements? That's the problem. The test was, do you ask a question? Don't you ask a question? Avram didn't ask the question. And that was because he didn't ask the question, he succeeded. And that was the most difficult question, because all the others, you do, you don't do. But this was the most difficult question. This is humanly impossible to reconcile. How did God reconcile it? A prophet only understands what God says through the communication. As we said, that, and as Rambam says in the fundamentals of Torah, he sees an image, and God gives immediate deciphering of that image to understand the message. The message was, bring him up as a burnt offering. And God wanted him to understand to mean, bring him up and slaughter him. God says, the message was never the slaughtering. I said, build the altar, put him on the altar, bind him, and then take him off. Except God didn't tell him to take him off yet. But that was his understanding, was bring him up as an offering and slaughter him, burn him. God says, that's not what I meant. I never said that. I wanted to see if you would go through those motions, believing you have to slaughter him, and you won't ask the question. To see to what degree are you negated to me? To what degree are you willing to give what's most precious that you have, your son? And you succeeded. And because of that, whenever there's prosecution against the Jewish people, the day of judgment, Rosh Hashanah, we blow the ram's horn, which is the merit of the Akedah, which immediately shuts down Satan, silences Satan. And that's why at the end of time, the verse which we say in the Musaf service, before Mashiach comes, what's going to happen? Yitokah b'shofar Godol, the great shofar, which blew at Sinai. The sound that we heard at Sinai, which was unending, which was an indication that the divine presence was on the mountain. That shofar was rooted in the sound of that ram's horn that Avram had brought his son as what? As that burnt offering. And instead of bringing him, he was given the ram to be brought in the place of Yitzhak. That's the merit. That's the merit of the Akedah. Mashiach at the end of time will come. That ram's horn will blow. There's going to be an ingathering of exiles. The Jews are going to come out of the woodwork throughout the world to greet Mashiach, whoever merits to greeting the Messiah. But again, it's the ram's horn, because it was a total negation. So the prophet only knows to the degree that God reveals to him. Beyond that, he doesn't know. But whatever he does know, within that capacity, he's able to trace it to its source. It's like someone says, I figured it all out, but this I didn't figure out. Sometimes you have to consult. And very often a prophet who's told something, he's not permitted to share it with another prophet unless God allows him to share it. We speak about confidentiality. You cannot breach confidentiality. If it's given to you, it's you to understand. And you're not permitted to even divulge how you have that information, or even to divulge that you have the information to that degree. But no prophet, including Moshe Rabbeinu, understood the essence of God. Because God's essence is not fathomable. God is infinite. Only within finite, Moshe Rabbeinu had the maximum level of understanding of whatever finite is. So the concept of ex nihilo, coming into existence, it's true. The energies emanate from the Hebrew alphabet, the conjugation of those letters. You may know how to conjugate it. But to understand how the source of how those letters, why they generate those energies, only God knows. Because God is the creator. We understand how God created, but why the power of creation, that we have no understanding. The power of creation is God himself. That's the ex nihilo. How do you extract darkness from light from darkness? Beginning we read, the world was dark. Choshech al pnei Sodom, darkness over the deep waters. God said, let there be light. The world was illuminated. Where did light come from? There was no source of light. God is able to extract darkness from light, light from darkness. You know, the two things, there's belief and there's trust. Two separate things. And this is really what I mentioned to Larry yesterday. We believe, and this is tenet of Jewish belief, that you do a mitzvah, there is reward. It's not an exercise in futility. That's a fact. Do you believe you're worthy of reward? Do you believe God will deliver? That's a fundamental belief. God says you do, you'll be compensated, you'll be rewarded. What is the degree of that reward? It has to do, the main reward cannot be given in this world because this world is finite. I'll give you an example. Person wins a $90 trillion lottery. Person says, you know something, I'm happy to take 1 trillion. Because there's not enough years I could live in this life, or enough children or descendants I could have, which I'll need that kind of money to support them. So anything above a certain number is totally irrelevant. It's irrelevant. Within this existence, you cannot be rewarded beyond a certain point, because the world has limitation. The spiritual world is unlimited. Because the spiritual world, what we reward is having a relationship with the source of all existence, which is God himself, which God himself is infinite. When you do the mitzvah, you do his will, and that's rooted in God himself. It allows us to cleave to him. Cleaving to him is not to be fathomed, because you're cleaving to a source which is infinite. You cannot in any way relate to what that is. Therefore, whenever you do a mitzvah, you cannot be rewarded in this world, because it has to be the equivalent of that. And there's nothing which is the equivalent of that. And that's what we read in Pirkei Avos, Schar ba'al meleko. There's no such thing as reward in this world. This world, you cannot be rewarded for a mitzvah. If you believe that, which is a fundamental Jewish belief, you put a penny in the charity box. You're performing a positive commandment. And every time you put the penny in, it's a positive commandment. Every time you put on your tefillin, even for a moment, every moment you wear your tefillin, it's a positive commandment. Every positive commandment you do, you put on a talus and you have tzitzis. Every nanosecond you wear that tzitzis, you're fulfilling a positive commandment. Every positive, even one, cannot be fully given in this world. The Talmud tells us at the end of Sanhedrin, a child that's born into existence, and he lives only long enough that he's able to say Amen. That's it. Amen. Amen is an acronym for Kel Melech Nemon. Kel Melech Nemon. God is the true king. That's all he said. That child has a share in the world to come. Could you imagine? One Amen, the child says, he has a share in the world to come. So if you say Amen multiple times throughout your lifetime, and you say a blessing, and you acknowledge God, God Almighty, the Master Almighty, King of the universe, Shakol Nibidvar, all came about through his word. What is that statement worth? It's a lot more than Amen. What is the value? Although it's rabbinical, but that statement is what? An acknowledgement of what? Of who God is. Everything that exists came through his word. Whether it's something which has unlimited worth or something which is totally mundane and basically insignificant. Because even what's insignificant, it exists because God willed it should exist. We find Yaakov, he was a very wealthy man, but yet he forgot some earthenware vessels, which had barely any worth. He went back for them. Why? Because that's Shakol Nebedvaro. If God endowed him even something which seems to be worthless, but it was given to him by God, that means I can't in any way abuse it or cast it away. So he went back even for earthenware vessels. That's what we learned from Yaakov. Because everything you have in life is an endowment of God. If God endowed it, it has somehow fits into the picture that you may need that for your development in spirituality. That's the understanding. We find in the Torah contradictions. Moshe says, just recently we read it in the book of Deuteronomy, and he's recounting what happened at Sinai, and he said, you didn't see any picture of God. God has no form. That's one of the beliefs. Ein lo gufa, ein lo dumusa guf. He has no profile. Because if it's infinite, there's no profile. Okay? But yet, we find that God is referred to a man of war. When they prophesied, they saw a profile. So what is it? In terms of who God is, at Sinai, what did we see? What did God reveal to every one of us? So the Midrash tells us, God opened heaven and earth and showed that nothing exists in existence except God himself. That's what he showed us. And everything that exists is a manifestation of his willing it should exist. But we didn't see the creator. The creators, we understood that. And yet, when God relates to the world, he relates to the world as an elderly sage, merciful, indiscriminate kindness. But that's the way he's relating. We only understand God how he relates, and that's the way God wants us to understand him. It's only within the context of creation. And we are creation. Our souls are creation, as great as they are, although they may be spiritual. Within that capacity, within that context, God wants us to relate, understand how he's interacting with us, to appreciate his glory. And if you appreciate it and you succeed in all the challenges, then you're worthy of having a relationship. That's the understanding. I said something very interesting this morning. It says in Pirkei Avos, in the beginning of the third chapter, if you consider three things, you'll never sin. You'll never come to the clutches of sin. From where do you come? Where are you going? And before who will you give a reckoning? Just want to speak about the third one. Before who you will give a reckoning. I mean, it's not enough to know that there's accountability. If there's accountability, you better be careful how you behave. A person knows if he commits a certain crime, he's going to be put to death. And there's no way to escape the fact that you'll be prosecuted. Without a question, you're not committing that crime. It's only because a person deludes himself and believes maybe he's going to get away with it. But a person knows that the moment he commits the crime, he's going to be caught immediately and he's going to be prosecuted, he's not committing that crime. Because there's accountability. Okay? So that scene will be enough that you should not cross that line to transgress. Does it really make a difference who the prosecutor is, who the judge is? If the judge gives the verdict, guilty, and guilty means death penalty, it doesn't make a difference who the judge is. Whether he's a Supreme Court judge or he's a federal prosecutor, it doesn't make a difference. But in regard to when we sin, you have to realize before who will you be judged? The King of Kings, not a mortal king, but God, the Creator himself, he will judge you. That will be even a greater deterrent not to cross that line. Why? So Rabbeinu Yonah in his commentary explains something very interesting. Person does something unconscionable, and it's so disgraceful, he can't show his face in public. But you know what people say? People forget. He keeps low for a year, for 2 years. After 2 years, although people remember the event, but it doesn't have the vividness, doesn't have the sharp edges of what it was when it first happened. Things start blurring, start fading. Even though fact-wise, it's the same fact. But all the nuances of that fact have actually been shaved down and pared down. Why is that? Because being a human being, the soul being embedded in physicality, that's one of the characteristics of physicality. We forget. And things gradually fade. And that's that's memory. We say time heals. Person loses a loved one. Time heals. But the person remembers the loved one and remember how he grieved originally. It was a level of pain which was not containable. But they said, time heals. A year passes, 2 years pass, you're able to somehow survive it. Initially, if you would have had to survive the first moment forever, you would have never survived it. It's only because and the Talmud says, God gave a gift to humanity. You know what the gift is called? Forgetting. And because there's a gift called forgetting, therefore a person is able to survive. But if you did not forget, you couldn't survive. The pain, the grief, which is so intertwined with your emotion, you wouldn't have survived it. So forgetting is a gift of God. Okay? But forgetting is only in the physical world. In the spiritual world, there's no forgetting. So if a person sins, like he has no conscience, on the day of reckoning, you know who you're going to be judged by? Not by an ordinary prosecutor, ordinary judge. You're going to come before God. When you're stripped of your physicality and you only have your soul, the level of shame is a level which we can't relate to. And that moment of shame will be eternal. Because there's no such thing as time causing you to forget. Because the whole concept of forgetting is only within the human context. Within the spiritual context, there's no forgetting. So the level of shame, which is even worse than the punishment for the sin, will be so all-consuming. So that's before who you will give a reckoning. Not an ordinary prosecutor. Not an angel. But the King of Kings, God himself. You know, he gives an example. A person comes before a magistrate and he tries to lie to him. And the magistrate catches him. No, she caught. Person, how do you lie? He says, I shouldn't. But if you come before the king and the king catches you with a lie, you have the audacity to lie to the king, that's unforgivable. Unforgivable. And when he catches you, the level of embarrassment is understanding the extreme level of that act, you couldn't survive it, and you won't survive it. That's going to happen after you go into the spiritual realm, and God will reckon you, and you come before him, and he asks you those questions. And he says, how did you do it? Why did you behave this way? And every one of us can be asked this question. And that's what Kavi Mahalal says. If you consider these things when we're still alive, you know what we're going to do? We're going to make corrections. We're going to straighten out. We're not going to cook the books, but you're going to make the corrections. You'll do the tshuva. You pay your dues. If you took something which wasn't yours, you'll give it back to the original owner. If you caused harm to anyone, you'll ask for forgiveness. You'll compensate people. You can stop behaving differently. You're going to turn over a new leaf. Because if you don't, it's going to be something not to be understood to what degree you're going to regret that. The prophet, when he understands something, when he internalizes it, it's not as we internalize things. When we internalize things, it goes through our physical faculties. Therefore, it's intermingled with our physicality. When the prophet comes upon anything, it's infusion directly in his neshama. So he experiences it at a level of profoundness and clarity, which there's nothing comparable to any human experience. You could have the greatest professor, mentor, to teach you truth, but it's not comparable to this. Because that truth that's taught to you, how do you come upon it? How do you process it? With your brain. That's a physical faculty. When the prophet comes upon truth, it's directly to a soul, which is something, there's nothing comparable to it. The body, the physical body, doesn't anyway detract from that. So what I was thinking, the Gemara tells us in 2 locations that the evil inclination every day renews itself. I'll give you an example. A person has a certain desire for food. You go, you buy yourself that steak. You eat that 8-course meal that you can't even push yourself away from the table. You have to call your wife to call the pharmacy to bring you some medication. That's how full you are. And you say, somebody said, would you want another portion? I said, look, if I took another portion, I think my gut would burst. Can't take it more. Enough. 3 days pass. He's already salivating when he passes the steakhouse. A few days ago, you couldn't look at the food. How's it possible? And this has been going on for the past 60 years. Do we learn our lesson? The evil inclination has the ability to present something as if you never experienced it before. He renews the desire. Person has a desire for a woman. He already satisfied that desire. And if he has a day passes, he has the identical desire, and it's been going on for 40 years. That has to do with evil inclination. He has the ability to present it as if you never experienced it before. Now, the question is, why? You understand, he has to do it that way. Because since there's such a thing, he uses the gift of forgetting, that you forget that you swore it off. You can't look at it. You forget. Once you forget, it's like for the first time. Person says, this looks familiar. I'm not going to record this.